I mean, this is the thing with, like, I know social media has ruined so many people's brains. There are people online, maybe they're bots, I don't know. But there are people online, we put out our story about Buttigieg and what he has done and what he hasn't done. And it's like, oh, you're just pissed off about the, because I worked on Bernie's campaign through 3 years ago. Oh, you're just pissed off about, you can't get over the fact that Pete Buttigieg won Iowa, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, how sociopathic do you have to be to see a mushroom cloud of vinyl chloride detonate over the American heartland and see people demanding the Secretary of Transportation, the chief regulator of the rail industry, people demanding that person take action? How sociopathic do you have to be to then say, oh, well, you're just mad about an Iowa caucus 3 years ago? I mean, this is insane. And the thing that bothers me so much is, how do we expect to get regulators to make better, more responsible decisions if those regulators can rely on the fact that something in their responsibility happens, goes badly, and they never face accountability at all? I've said this before, I'll say it again. The crazy thing is to look back on the halcyon days, I'm kidding, of course, the halcyon days of the George W. Bush administration, when a person who was running the Federal Emergency Management Agency, who did not have qualifications to run that agency, sort of very publicly dropped the ball in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And there was public demands about why was this person appointed? What are they doing? They're not doing the right job. That person felt the public pressure to resign. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world now where you can be the Michael Brown of the rail or the airline systems infrastructure and rely on the fact that your own party's voters are just going to see a disaster and reflexively defend you. And the problem with that, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, is the people like Pete Buttigieg can rely on that. They don't feel like they have to do anything because there's kind of a defense system, a political defense system baked in for them.
Yeah, and like in thinking about this, whether it's Pete Buttigieg, whether it's Southwest Airlines or Norfolk Southern, I mean, the thing that I'm struck by with this is that, like, if it wasn't Southwest or Norfolk, it would just be another railroad company or airline company. Because, like, I think the situation that exists is that, like, these companies are allowed to operate as essentially as monopolies or as cartels in the form of the airline industry. And, like, of course, they're allowed to run these companies in a way that maximizes profit and shows the littlest regard for human life, safety, or just, like, the consumer possible. Right. So, like, of course, Southwest Airlines, like, their system is going to shit the bed and it's going to cause a disaster during the Christmas holiday. But, like, if it was a couple years ago, it was Delta or Spirit, and, like, Norfolk, like, I'm sure, like, another company is going to, one of their trains is going to go off the tracks. And if it wasn't Secretary Buttigieg, it'd be some other stooge in his place. It's just like they each, like, in exchange for a compliant regulatory apparatus, they each have to, like, occasionally sit in the musical chair of having the public be mad at them. But essentially, like, it's not just, it's just the entire system. It's an entire apparatus that allows these companies to exist as monopolies and cartels and run their business in a way that, like, is incredibly unsafe and is only for the value of the shareholder. So, like, of course, there's going to be disasters like this, and it's just going to keep happening. And we're going to be mad at a different company or airline or Secretary of Transportation in a month or two or a year or two.
That's totally right, and that's why I go back to, for instance, the work that we do at The Lever, which is there's a presumption or at least a theory. And the theory is that you can't start fixing this stuff until the people in offices accountable to the public, that they have to assume that if they fuck up, they will face real public accountability. And part of that is there needs to be a media that is holding them accountable, or at least surfacing the facts that allow the public to hold them accountable. That if your reaction to a disaster inside of a regulatory context, a deregulatory context, if your reaction is, I'm going to defend the regulator, you are part of helping create the regulatory conditions for future disasters. If you want better regulations, I don't care if it's on the rail stuff or the airline stuff or anything else, if you want better regulations to prevent future disasters in all of these realms, when a disaster happens, part of what the response needs to be is public accountability for the regulator. Shame, surfacing facts about decisions that were made that were bad, congressional hearings, all the things that create pressure on a regulator to act. Now, I will say, I was very happy to see that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, both said, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, that Pete Buttigieg needs to act to make sure these kinds of things don't happen again. Now, that's only 2 Democratic congresspeople, but the point is that should be the reaction writ large to this, so that ultimately it's not about, as you suggest, it's not about Pete Buttigieg specifically. It's how do we say who's ever in that transportation department position knows they have to do their job. And I want to add one other thing, and this is specifically about Pete. If Pete wanted to just be on TV doing the pundit shows to defend the Biden administration, I mean, he was on the Sunday shows. This is incredible. While this disaster was unfolding, he was on the Sunday shows last week, and he didn't even get asked about this. He was just talking about Biden's State of the Union. It's unbelievable, right? But like if that's the job
honestly,
he wants,
I said a week ago, if in lieu of the State of the Union, if Biden wanted to present what is the State of the Union, it would have just been like a live feed of that fucking mushroom cloud in East Palestine.
Exactly, it's terrible. But I think the point is, like, if that's the, like, I think there are a lot of folks out there who think, oh, Pete's good on TV, he's great at his job. It's like, that's not the job, right? If Pete's good at that job and wants that job, he should go be the White House press secretary. Great, go be the White House press secretary. The Department of Transportation job is like a real job with like real responsibilities, and again, like responsibilities that other government officials don't have and can't use their power for. I mean, I go back to the airline thing. This is why, I mean, just as much pressure on him for the airline about the airline stuff should be a focus. In that situation, attorneys general, the United States attorneys general, they're literally preempted from regulating the airlines. The only person who can regulate the airlines under the current law is the Secretary of Transportation. So if the Secretary of Transportation doesn't want to do that job, they shouldn't be Secretary of Transportation, because that's a real job.
So, like, we've been talking about, like, what might a functioning society, like one with a vested interest in, like, not crashing thousands of tons of hydrochloric acid into the air and water, like, how would they react, like a functioning society, to something like that?
If you believe in, I'm putting this in quotes, law and order, there's quote unquote law and order for most of us, and there's lawlessness and disorder at the very top. And I do think there are obvious ways you can deter all of this kind of behavior. I mean, we've been talking about rail safety rules as an example, but it something much deeper is, yes, consequences for the decision makers, the people, the literal individuals making these decisions are key. That we know from the financial crisis, that's a good example. There were consequences for the companies in terms of fines, financial consequences that were essentially, are essentially write-offs, the cost of doing business. But there were not consequences for the individual executives that made those decisions. And the problem with that is that every future executive who then goes into those jobs can essentially assume that there wouldn't be consequences, individual consequences for them if they make the same decisions. So whether it is nationalizing these companies, removing management, subjecting management to criminal investigation for decisions that kill people, all of those things are the things that almost never happen in this society anymore. And I was talking to a friend recently. I think I've got this right. I'm trying to think of the last time any top executives at any major company that kind of systemically harmed the country, when the last time was any of those folks were held accountable. Now, the one I came up with was there was Enron and Arthur Andersen in the early Bush administration that happened. But I actually can't think of other
I mean, the example that coming to mind from my childhood was like the big tobacco, the big settlements of that. But
Sure.
I mean, that was still just like a settlement, and these companies they're still around. But I mean, I just did an event with Steven Donziger, and we were talking about this, and like if you consider that, like, okay, yeah, tobacco companies knew that cigarettes caused cancer, they knew nicotine was addictive, and they like essentially just covered it up for years and profited off of it. If you compare that level of corporate malfeasance to the fact that like every petroleum company knew exactly what global warming was in the 70s and did the exact same thing as tobacco companies did, the scale of that is like, as bad as lung cancer is, the scale of that is even more staggering. Like and they haven't even come close to being held accountable for that.
Totally. And I think
companies ever really were held accountable.
Totally. And I think that the reason I bring up the Enron Arthur Andersen stuff was, I mean, that was 20 years ago. Right? Like it's been 20 years since there's, don't give me the idea that, oh, well, you know, companies have decided to follow the law more.
Yeah.
And right. I mean, obviously that didn't happen. I mean, the financial crisis as an example, right? That was just a complete kind of orgy of lawlessness. So what happened was that various decisions were made at the government level. And frankly, it was normalized among the public at large that folks at the top of companies that harm lots and lots of people, they don't get held accountable for anything. And so we're now living in that world. And the crazy thing is, it's not to like give credit to Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, but like Ronald Reagan went after the SNL folks. George W. Bush's administration went after the Enron and Arthur Andersen, not because they're great crusaders, but because that was like the minimum of what was expected to be done. Like that was the norm. That's what happens. Now that never happens, right? I guess the example that people I guess can hold up now is, oh well, you know, Sam Bankman-Fried. And look, Sam Bankman-Fried was a huckster, was a scammer, but like that's not at the level of the rail companies, of the oil companies, of the airlines, of Enron and the financial speculator industry back on Wall Street in the 80s, right? Like, I think what's gone on is people hold up, they went after Bernie Madoff, or they went off after Sam Bankman-Fried. These are like small examples to pretend like you're doing something. And it's not to say that Madoff and Sam Bankman-Fried shouldn't have been, you know, prosecuted and the like, but it's like you're holding up this like little emblematic kind of spectacle trophy example while you're not going after the real problems. And so, yeah, like I'm sure the guys at Norfolk Southern are like, yeah, you know, like we don't give a shit about what just happened. Like what you think we're going to change now? But like no one's going to come after us. Like no one's going to come after our company. And if that's the case, if that's what happens after you detonate a mushroom cloud of vinyl chloride over the heartland of America, then we should expect the same thing to happen over and over again.